Hello and welcome to the Shed Sounds Media YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Beabout, and joining me is my long-term Deep Cuts co-host, my friend, Mike Lieto. How you doing, Mike?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you doing, buddy?
Good, I'm doing great. So today we're going to be doing something new for this channel. I've never ranked a whole band. To be honest with you, whenever I hear so-and-so band ranked, it makes me think of, cheese. But, it's like, are you saying they're bad? But aside from that, what we're actually doing is we are going to order the Gentle Giant studio albums by our preference. So the worst to the best. And I think what we found as we listened to these is that there's like 3 or 4 that are very clearly at the bottom, and then everything else could be number 1. And it's just like
the margin is so narrow for these
exactly.
albums. Yeah. And this
It's
is
so
our
close.
opinion also. This is subject to our bias.
Exactly. And if I were going to do an objective ranking, that might be different. I guess we can start by saying why we love Gentle Giant. And for me, it's to me they're like one of the most unique so-called progressive bands, because they can manage to ride the line between being incredibly complex and also accessible.
It's like not just a show of force that they present on these albums. It's also clever songwriting and really good music. Like all of the songs are like, save for maybe like one album, all the songs are really musical and, have a lot to say. And they condense all of their ideas into, like, it's prog music, right? But it's condensed into anywhere from like a minute and a half to 6 or 7 minutes at most. It's very impressive music, and it's done with emotion and high caliber playing and singing. These guys are playing for themselves, and they're having fun. It's very evident when you listen to the records, and especially when you watch them live. It's very apparent they're having fun, and that is just a treat, a total treat. They got it all, really. That's why I love Gentle Giant. They got it all.
And very little interest in fads or popularity, but they're one of the few bands that you could hear something that kind of sounds like R&B or rock and roll, and then the next thing you hear sounds like it's from the Elizabethan era, and it's played on old woodwind instruments and stuff. Like they retain a sense of Englishness across their work that I would compare them to, say, Jethro Tull in that sense, because Jethro Tull had that same kind of Elizabethan thread and old school folk.
Gentle Giant is a band that's fairly static in membership, except in its infancy.
Very early years.
Yeah, the first few albums of Gentle Giant had several different musicians that are in the classic lineup, quote unquote.
Yeah, so the core lineup is John Weathers on drums, Ray Schulman on bass and acoustic guitar and vocals and violin, Derek Schulman on vocals, sometimes saxophone, sometimes bass, guitar, Gary Green on guitar, and Kerry Minier on keyboards, as well as guitar vocals. With that in mind, they did have some people in and out of the first couple of years. So you may hear us talk about Phil Schulman, who's the elder Schulman brother. He left after Octopus. Also, the original drummer that's Martin Smith, right? That's the original drummer.
Yep.
He appears only on the first 2 albums, and we will probably talk about him. And then Malcolm Mortimer was only on one record, 3 Friends, but he also participated in Gary Green's 3 Friends band.
Yes.
So he's certainly part of the legacy for that.
Yeah, and he's also a great drummer too.
So let's get started here on our list. Mike, you're the honored guest, so I think I'm going to let you start here. This is number 11.
So number 11, I think we line up in several places, and this is one of them. Number 11 is one that I don't own, and that's Giant for a Day, the weakest studio album.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus, man. So there's a couple of Gentle Giant albums I did not hear until this year, We were prepping for the Missing Piece video that we did a few months back. Check that out if you haven't, by the way. I listened to Giant for a Day for the first time, and I was, like a lot of Gentle Giant fans, I'm sure, severely disappointed.
Yeah.
They're trying to go for a pop direction, but I don't know. It just does not sound like genuine music. The songwriting is bad. The playing is fine, but the singing is just, the lyrics are really bad, like almost painful for half the album. It's like the band left the room before they started recording. Yeah. It's really bad. It sounds completely different. The only thing I like about this album, truthfully, is the artwork. I think the artwork is a ton of fun, but it is genuinely a bad album. I don't say that things are a bad album very often, because usually I'll find some sort of merit, but I quite honestly can't find it in this album. And it's such a shame for me to say that about a band that I really, love so much, and have also of this high caliber of musicianship they played this.
Yeah.
Like what? I just can't. I'm disappointing.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's number 11 is also for me. Giant for a Day. The reason why it's bad for me is that I think that all of the air had left the band by that point. All the enthusiasm, all the momentum, I think they were just burned out. I think that Giant for a Day and Spooky Boogie are kind of fun. I mean, especially the video for Giant for a Day where they're using the album cover as a mask and they're kind of goofing in it with it. But like the song Thank You to me sounds like a really, really poor rewrite of Stand by Sly and the Family Stone, which is a great song for Sly and the Family Stone.
Yes.
I just don't want to hear that from Gentle Giant.
They maybe should have taken a break rather than recorded this album.
Yeah, but I think that at this point the music industry was beginning to weigh on them, and I think that they were looking to settle down at this point. So my number 10 is The Missing Piece, and here is the latest issue of this record. This is the Steven Wilson Atmos and 5.1 stereo mixes. I had never heard this album, and we just did a lengthy discussion on this album with our friend Jocko, which I will link. That'll be at the end of this video. This isn't really what I want from Gentle Giant. It's the same problem that I had with Giant for a Day, although it's not as bad. There are a couple of good tunes on it, like Memories of the Old Days is a phenomenal tune. And I think you had made the comment that if you were making a Gentle Giant compilation, that would be your pick from this album. I also really like For Nobody, even though it's one that I think Jocko didn't like, and some fans...
Yeah, I like that one too.
It just gets stuck in my head all the time.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be something to that. And 2 Weeks in Spain is fun. Bet you thought we couldn't do it.
Yeah, I love those two songs. Turning Around, I think, is a good one also.
If this is the second worst album in the catalog, it's a quality album. I think that this is better than Giant for a Day by a wide stretch.
Yeah.
But still, I do think that this was a point in the band's history where they were starting to wind down a little bit. And you can hear the effects of that exhaustion coming through by Giant for a Day.
So my number 10 is another Gentle Giant album I don't physically own, and that's Civilian, the last album. The reason why this is here is partly because I'm so unfamiliar with it, because this is another album that I've heard for the first time this year in 2024. If I hear it more, it might rise up in the ranks because it is a really cool album. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on this album, and there's a lot of potential for a future that didn't happen on Civilian. The songwriting is really strong. There's a lot of new wave influence. I think you mentioned that it sounds kind of like the Cars sometimes, and I thought that was like right on. Like you hit the nail on the head with that. I wish they kept going with it. It sounds great. There's a lot of fun songs on here. And like you said, too, for me, this is a major step up from the last one. So like Giant for a Day for me is like a 2 out of 10. And then this album's like between a 6 and a 7. It might even become a 7 the more you listen to it. Again, I'm just not as familiar with it.
Yeah.
But it is strong, and it's a testament to the caliber of this band that they have 11 albums. Number 10 is a 7 out of 10. Like the whole rest of the discography is like a 7 or above. That's really incredible. Like to have that consistency in your work is really something that's rare.
My number 9, I guess we're going to do back and forth. My number 9 is also, Civilian. I don't have this one either. Although I would like to get it someday because I really like it. When I woke up this morning, I had the same opinion that you do, that I'm more familiar with Missing Piece because I listened to it 5 or 6 times earlier this year to prepare for our discussion. And but I just decided to put on Civilian today, and I thought, wow, this is pretty decent. It's different. It's more like like I said, and then you said, and I'm going to say it again. It's like the Cars. Or there's even that one song that made me think of Supertramp a little bit. I want to say Inside Out.
Yeah, I thought it fit on Breakfast in America.
Yeah,
you're right.
And that kind of brings up what I was going to say about this album, and that's that Missing Piece, it shouldn't be a thing that bothers me, but that one almost has no backing vocals whatsoever. And to me, that's Gentle Giant's signature, is those lush 4 or 5 part vocal harmonies that they did all the time. And this is a return to that. There's a lot of like really sweet, powerful backing vocals on this album, and I think it really elevates it. I also think that one thing that makes this a better album to me than Missing Piece is that Missing Piece is very much looking backward. It sounds like they're going back to their R&B roots in a way that maybe they hadn't since the first album, which we'll get to in a moment. But this is looking forward. Civilian, like you said, this is a preview of a future that never happened. When I listen to this one, it's a shame, I think, that it didn't go further. But my pick for favorite song from this is, I think, either Inside Out, but I'm probably going to have to go with All Through the Night because it's just, that riff is so killer. And again, like Gary Green's guitar work on this album is front and center. Same with Missing Piece, but I think it's even more so on Civilian. Like he's really up in front. So yeah, that's my number 9. What's your number 9?
Yes, I forgot to pick a favorite track also. So I think All Through the Night was mine too. I just need to hear that one more. But my number 9 is The Missing Piece. So we've kind of flopped. I do think what you're saying about there being less of a vocal emphasis on this album is very interesting and also kind of true. I think the problem with this album is that it's kind of like a little bit more thin than especially everything that came before it in almost every aspect. I do think Wilson's mix of this album really makes it shine as best as it can because it is just really terrific. You can hear everything clear as a bell. This album does have a couple clunkers on it, but I do think I like it overall. Like they're trying something different. They're going back to their roots a little bit, but they're also taking some chances and they're having fun with it. Like, there's tons of tongue in cheek and Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It. 2 Weeks in Spain is so much fun. Turning Around is like, it's a straight ahead ballad, but it's also really fun. And you get to hear Derek sing his butt off on the whole album, really. Derek kind of shines on this album. Derek and Gary really are like the highlights for me on this album. And especially, we mentioned it before, but Memories of Old Days is one of the best songs that the band's ever done. There's nothing else like that song also in the catalog. It's really unique and really beautiful. I think the clunkers kind of hold it back for me. Like I don't like Who Do You Think You Are and As Old As You Are, As Old As You're Young and Winning. Neither of those songs really work for me. And this is one of the last Gentle Giant albums on this ranking that have songs that don't work for me. There's like maybe 1 or 2 in the next ones, but that's about it. So that's my number 9, right? Number 9.
Yeah.
Number 9.
Number 9. Moving on to, we're now in number 8.
Number 8.
My number 8 is this friendly guy right here. He wasn't a giant for a day. He was a giant for life.
That's right. Always a giant.
Always a giant.
That sleeve. That's so great.
I actually think this is a great album. And in many ways, I think you could use this album to turn somebody on to the band. Because it isn't Gentle Giant in full on, we've embraced our identity mode. There's still kind of playing stuff, I think, that worked for pubs and working the circuit and stuff. And that's why like songs like Why Not just rock out with absolutely no reservations. But along with that, I also think that this album contains a number of mission statements for the band. Like the song Giant is, they said in the liner notes that it was inspired by Frank Zappa. The combination of jazz, rock, and different things coming together. But that song is basically saying, we are here.
Yeah.
This is what we are about. And check us out. And it also has the concert classic, Funny Ways. It has Alucard, which they used as the name of their record label to this day. They still use Alucard. I just think it's a really creative, it's well produced, Tony Visconti, even though some of the production's a little dated. Some of the ideas don't quite work. Like, I'm not crazy about the Queen. The final song is just like, it doesn't.
It's fine, yeah.
This was actually my second Gentle Giant album ever, so I'm kind of surprised at myself that I'm not rating it higher than I am. And there might have been a time where I rated it near the top. I do really like this album.
My rate is also the debut Gentle Giant. Could you believe that? Here it is. I don't own this one either, but Ian does. So look to him for the cover for some more Giant Eyes. Yeah, my thoughts are kind of similar. I was really having trouble like listening with preparation for the video. Trying to remember if I had heard this album in full beforehand. I might not have. I might have heard it like only once previously before the past couple of weeks. Like Ian said, it's got a lot of ideas on it. It's like a mission statement for the band. Like, here we are Gentle Giant. Here's a song called Giant that has almost everything that we do.
And the album cover.
Yeah, and it's a total success in that way. It's great. I do think some of the ideas don't work, and some things are a bit messy and muddled.
Dated.
And dated for sure. It's probably the most dated of the whole discography, quite honestly. I do think also Isn't It Quiet and Cold is a weak song. I think the lyrics are pretty throwaway on that one, and it doesn't work for me. The Queen doesn't work so well for me either. Giant is kind of like, it's like you can hear the Zappa influence, but it's just kind of too like clunky. Like, it could have been smoothed out into like two different songs almost. The middle section sounds like the Magma first album, the debut. There's the section in there, it's like could have been off Kobaya.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really weird for me. Yeah, I was like, oh, is this Magma's debut? And they kind of have the same kind of goal, those two albums.
Same year, I think.
And the same year, yeah. That's a fun parallel for me as a big Magma freak, like Ian is too. Yeah, I think it's a good album. I think it's, I don't like it as much as everything above it. And I like it a little more than Missing Piece, which is obviously hence the placement of the album. But I do think Alucard and Funny Ways are some of the best Gentle Giant tracks, period. Those are great.
My number 7, I don't own except for Here. And that's Acquiring the Taste. I used to think Acquiring the Taste was the best thing the band had ever done. There was a time where I really thought that.
Yeah, that always shocked me.
And this album has the mission statement. We were talking about mission statements. When I was first getting into progressive rock, like many young progressive rock fans, I took it very seriously. And when I read this note on the inner sleeve, I took it as like, this is the Bible. Like, this is the word of God. And here's the quote. It is our goal to expand the frontiers of contemporary popular music at the risk of being very unpopular. We've recorded each composition with the one thought, that it should be unique, adventurous, and fascinating. It has taken every shred of our combined musical and technical knowledge to achieve this. From the outset, we have abandoned all preconceived thoughts of blatant commercialism. Instead, we hope to give you something far more substantial and fulfilling. All you need to do is sit back and acquire the taste. Now, I read that now as a guy in his early 30s, and I'm like, it's like, this is pretentious nonsense. But as a 16, 17-year-old music nerd, who that was my whole personality, was that I was music guy. This was everything. And this was the standard which I judged all Gentle Giant records against. Now, I read the liner notes for Three Piece Suite, and the whole thing was a joke. it was all about kissing the management's ass and how they didn't want to do that to get ahead. Maybe I'll get demonetized, but oops. But that was the whole concept. But anyway, here's my critical appraisal of this album now, and that's that it is experimental, it is far-reaching, but it doesn't always work. And sometimes you can kind of hear where it's like, yeah, that's a good idea, but I don't know if it works that well in execution. Still, this album has a atmosphere like none other. This is like October 30th at midnight. Halloween's right around the corner. Leaves on the ground. And I think I originally heard it in the fall too. So it's like that even just cements that further. My favorite tracks from Acquiring the Taste are Pantagruel's Nativity, The House is Street in the Room, The Moon is Down, and Black Cat. I think nothing comes close to those.
Well, funny you should say. My number 7 is also Acquiring the Taste. So here's the inner sleeve. And if you don't have the album pulled out, here's what it looks like. Acquiring the Taste, mayhaps. It's really one of the weirdest and funniest album covers. They really went in for this one. Honestly, my critical appraisal of this album is the same as yours, Ian. For me, it's also a major fall album. Like, I really love this thing in the fall. I think I also heard it for the first time in the fall, but it just has that sound. It has like a, it's not the clearest production, but it's very warm and inviting, and like it really sounds like it's like 5 o'clock in like the middle of October, early November. The leaves have all changed. The sun is setting. You're hearing the moon is down, and the moon is coming up. It's great. It's beautiful sound. I have a soft spot for this album for sure. It's not their best album though, which is hence why it's down in the back half. Like Plain Truth, I don't think works really at all. That's probably the one weakest song on this album. Wreck is just okay. I do like the title track, but not as much as the rest of the album. My highlights are the same as yours, especially Pantagruel's Nativity and The House, the Street, the Room. I think those are probably the strongest Gentle Giant tracks at this point in their career, and it's by like a large margin. It's like those songs and then like maybe Black Cat and then everything else. Mm-hmm. At least at this point of the second album of the band. I mean, like Pantagruel's Nativity is a really amazing song, especially with all those trumpets. Yeah, it's really special. It has like this, I think, the first Hallmark sound song that the band has. It's got everything. It's got the heavy medieval Victorian era England sound. It's got progressive rock. It's got R&B a little bit. It's extremely well composed and orchestrated. It's got it all. That's some standout.
Nasty guitar playing from Gary Green.
Yeah, Gary sounds amazing on this tune.
Yeah, he sounds like Tony Iommi a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I wonder if they had a little of that like Sabbath energy in because like sometimes Sabbath is a fall kind of sound to it also, and that translates into this album also.
I believe they were label mates with Sabbath, and they opened for Sabbath on the Octopus tour. There's a recording of that.
There we go. There's a connection there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I think Sabbath liked them too. That's why they would have opened for them. It didn't go well with the fans of the band. That was a famously.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So we're moving on to number 6, and my number 6 is Tre Hombre.
Trombe.
Not the ZZ Top album, but Three Friends by Gentle Giant, and it's that couch. That little couch down there. So here's my spiel on Three Friends. I used to not like this album, like at all. And because I was in school, I was in high school when I heard it, and I was like, why are these guys glorifying this thing that imprisons me? Like when they're talking about school times, happy times, and I'm like, but I'm miserable. Like I don't relate to this at all. But when I got older and I started looking back on school and thinking like, that wasn't so bad. Like at the time I thought it was, but now I look back on it with this sense of, oh, those were simpler, happier, easier times, gentler times. And so now I like that. I like School Days. Now it works for me. But the 2024 appraisal of this album, this most recent time I listened to it, is that it's a huge leap forward from the first two albums, Gentle Giant and Acquiring the Taste. It's less experimental than potentially either one of those, but it trades that for consistency. And I think that it also is the first time that the funky giant shows up. And a big part of that is because Malcolm Mortimer is the drummer. The original drummer is Martin Smith.
Martin Smith, yeah.
Yeah. He's fine.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think his playing is that strong with the band, actually.
No, it's not. And he kind of falls over himself a few times, like in House of Street in the Room.
His fills
Plain Truth.
They don't fit really well. They don't flow.
No. And I think it's because he was more of a straight ahead drummer. He was a holdover from the Simon Dupree and the Big Sound days, which was the early incarnation of Gentle Giant. I just feel that Malcolm Mortimer really lifts this one up, and it makes it more like funky giant mode, and it makes it just seems to go down a lot easier. The whole thing is just
also, yeah.
And it just flies by when you listen to it. But like Prologue is like a classic, it almost sounds like ELP with those Hammond organs and stuff. Like it's just like textbook prog. But then School Days is anything but. School Days is all over the place. And like when I was sitting and listening to this, I thought this is some of the most gorgeous music I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And Working All Day is fun. And that kind of brings me, these next two songs, Working All Day and Peel the Paint. When I started thinking about what this album is about and kind of reading about it, I realized it's their strongest concept, because it's about how when we're kids, we make friends easily because we don't have really awareness of socioeconomic structures, or jobs don't exist. So it's not like, oh, my job's more important. But when we become adults, a lot of that stuff starts to happen. These blocks between people and difficulties in forming relationships. And, somebody who's your best friend in the second grade, now thinks differently than you, votes differently than you, has a completely different life, lives in a different world than you. And I just find that such a profound progressive rock concept. Like this isn't like, dragons and stuff. This is like real life. Like this actually happens to everyone. It's
very grounded.
Yeah. Which is matched by music that isn't really grounded. It's very, fanciful in a way. And like Peel the Paint, they said that it's kind of the idea that the nicest, friendliest person can turn into a monster when they're angry.
Yeah.
And that song just kind of, you have this real formal beginning, and then it goes into like Jimi Hendrix mode for the second half with a great solo from Gary Green. And here I am, I'm talking about every song, but I think every song is a highlight. Mr. Class and Quality and Three Friends rounding out the album. I think we kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think if I were being objective, this might be Gentle Giant's best album, Three Friends.
It's a real showcase, honestly. It's a real showcase.
It might be their best album, but there's ones that I just like more. And so we're on number 6, right? What's your number 6?
My number 6 is this album, In a Glass House. Now I'm going to, again, pull the sleeve out because unfortunately my light is right above my head, so it's hard to do that. But this album, In the Glass House, and I have the 30th anniversary, so it has this nice little paper sleeve that came with the disc. So this one is a little bit of story time for me too. So Acquiring a Taste was Ian's favorite growing up. I first heard Gentle Giant early high school when I was really diving into progressive rock. Also, I was like maybe 15. Back then in high school, my favorite Gentle Giant album was this one, In a Glass House, and it was like no contest for a long time. And I hadn't heard it in a long time until a couple of years ago, I was driving home from my old job, and it was like pouring rain. It was a tough drive. That was sounded good, but I was like, it didn't hit as hard as it used to hit. And listened to it again, 3 days ago, it had the same effect. Although side 2 of this album is really amazing, and it's like peak Gentle Giant.
It is,
in my opinion.
It is.
The concept is really good. It's really loose. It's about a guy in prison, more or less, or it's a mental asylum. It's really vague, so it's hard to get the whole thing. It's about trying to break out of your glass house as well, your personal life. And this is one of those albums where they really lean into their vast catalog of instruments that they use, and it's mostly successful. Inmate's Lullaby, I think, is a great example of that. That is a song that is, it perfectly evokes the creepiness and unsettling feeling of being in an insane asylum, and you're overhearing the doctor saying, I heard someone saying, I think he'll be staying here for a long time. And, they're bringing in food and clothes for you. And they do all of this unsettling, creepy atmosphere with just voice and percussion. That's very creative, and that's very awesome. I think it's a real showcase. It's not one of my favorite songs on the album. I do like it quite a bit, but it is very successful at what it does. But I think the real masterpiece on this album is the title track, In a Glass House. It's easily one of the best Gentle Giant songs by a large margin. It perfectly wraps up everything that came before it, and also brings forth its own new ideas in such a fun way. And my God, does that chorus rock or what? This Gentle Giant rocking, and it doing it the best that they've done it, at least up to this point anyway. The reason why it's not as strong for me anymore is two things. I like, Experience is an amazing song. Runaways is a great song, but Runaways I think is better, or The Runaway, excuse me, is better live than in the studio. It's slightly a little long, I think. And the biggest halt on this album for me is Way of Life. It's not a bad song, right? But it definitely should not be 7 minutes long. It kind of drags and drags. It's a nice melody. It really feels exactly like a church hymn, and it is a church hymn in the middle, but it's far too long. And the album grinds to a severe halt. But then you flip the record over, and side 2 starts with Experience. It's like, oh, okay, this song is awesome. And then Reunion's a nice little tune, and then you get the title track. It's like, man, this album fucking rocks. But you kind of forget about Way of Life for a little while. It's just, it's no longer as great as it used to be. It's, has flow problems, unfortunately, and which for a concept album like this is not so great. There are a lot better flowing concept albums, like the one that Ian mentioned before, Three Friends. That flows way better than this album. It's still a terrific album. I probably still would give it an 8, but, it doesn't flow as amazing as it probably could or should have. And this also was not released in the States, right? This was not available at all until the CD
not until
era.
2006.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is insanely late.
When I remastered the CDs, actually not a bad band at all. I like that little contrapunctual part, and that sort of this fugal thing is pretty interesting. I wouldn't sign them.
Number 5. My number 5 is In a Glass House.
Their 5th album.
Their 5th album. Wow, it's like I planned that. This album, as you had said so eloquently, has 3 absolute classics. The Runaway and Experience, which I do agree kind of work better as a medley. It was the best parts of both.
Yeah, it's really clever to do that.
But I agree with you that Way of Life drags down the pacing quite a bit. And when I was listening to it and I was ranking it, I actually had it lower on my list while I was in the middle of Way of Life. And then when I heard In a Glass House, I was like, oh, this is better. It's really a testament, I think, of structuring your album in a way that your strongest material is at the front, the middle, and the end. What I was going to point out is that this album is 1973, and this is the same year as Lark's Tongues and Aspic, which is another similarly challenging album. Yeah. Masterpiece album. It's the same year as A Passion Play by Jethro Tull, which is very far-reaching. I think that at this time, there was a brief point in pop history where it was okay to be excessive, and the audiences wanted it. And I think that much like the debut, it's a product of its time. What holds this album back is the tracks being just a little bit too long. Maybe they could have trimmed it and put another song on it to add some contrast. But the playing is amazing. Like this is jaw-dropping playing. This is more than just, this is quaint and interesting. This is, these guys are amazing.
Like holy moly, jaw on
next
the floor
level
kind of playing. Yeah, you're totally right.
So that was my number 5. What's your number 5?
My number 5 is Three Friends, and I have a really cool Japanese CD edition.
Ooh,
I went to
how'd
Japan.
You get that?
So I went to Japan with my wife.
You went to Japan?
Yeah, I went to Japan. Yeah, I wanted to go since I was a kid. I'm a big fan of the culture, and I, just drawn there for whatever reason. My wife and I went for our honeymoon in February, and it was life-changing. It was incredible trip. And they have a wonderful CD culture over there, and I bought a lot of really rare CDs, and I could have bought probably another suitcase full, but I had to stop somewhere. But I did get this, and I'm glad that I got this because this Japanese edition from the 90s sounds awesome. And also, I have never owned this album until this year. This is another one that historically has been a favorite of mine. At one point, this is probably number 2, but I only had like iTunes files. Like I heard this when I was, again, 15 or 16. And at that point, you would, if you didn't have the CD, you'd buy it on iTunes and have it in your iTunes library. The other cool thing is you get the booklet, which has this neat art and the story, which truthfully, I never really knew until this year.
Me neither.
And all these really great Japanese CDs have their own booklet in Japanese, which is really cool. Ian very eloquently spoke about this album, and I agree with him wholly. It's a really strong album. It flows really, really well. Malcolm Mortimer really steps this album up to another plateau. This is a massive step up from the first 2 albums. Like this is where Gentle Giant really found like their sound more or less. It's less experimental, but it's not only is it more straightforward and focused, but it's tight, and it's tight in a good way. There really isn't a weak track on here. Everything really slaps. I think the best thing on here is School Days for sure. School Days is like a top 5 or even top 3 Gentle Giant song. This is a freaking masterpiece. It's a gorgeous piece of music. Every time I hear it, I have to stop what I'm doing and listen to the whole thing because it's amazing. Like from the opening, like marimba lines, forget it. It's great. And it has that one of the best Gentle Giant trademarks, which is another thing that I love about this band, is the really intricate medieval vocal lines. My goodness, they are so good on this song. It's just a real tour de force. Peel the Paint's great. I love the low saxophones and Working All Day. That just like lifts that song from the bottom register. It gives it some heft. It is badass. I can just picture like a trudging into the office, like working all day. I'm picking up the pieces. It's perfect. It's beautiful musical imagery. I love this album. It's great. I just have, you may have a point. I think there may be one other album that might be the best Gentle Giant album besides this one, which you're going to get to.
Objectively. But subjectively, I just like a few better. Hell, this might actually rise up if we do this again. Same here. Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But this album's great. I love it. Prologue, the title track, and especially School Days are probably the standouts for me. Like, what an amazing record this is, huh?
My number 4 is The Power and the Glory, an album that is, this version of it is rather difficult to come by now.
Yeah.
My thoughts on this one is that it carries over a lot of the same brittleness that In a Glass House has, a lot of the same technical precision, but it's warmer. It's a warmer brittleness.
Yeah.
And it's funkier and it's more accessible. And the songs almost have somewhat normal song structures like Cogs and Cogs. It's a crazy prog song with all these nuts time signatures, but it's basically just a verse, chorus, bridge thing. Same with Playing the Game is pretty straightforward. It's even minimalistic, which is a word that I would not use to describe any Gentle Giant material other than maybe Giant for a Day.
Yeah.
But in a different way. This is like the classical sense of minimalistic with that little Schulberry bleep bleep.
I
bleep,
love
bleep,
that
bleep,
sound.
Bleep bleep bleep. You know, but it's like that same. It's like Terry Riley almost. It's like that same thing that keeps going.
Slow ride in the fast machine kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
This has one of my absolute favorite, just jaw-droppingly beautiful Carrie Minier songs, and that's Aspirations. And I guess I would point to the middle of the album as being my three favorites. These are my picks: Aspirations, Playing the Game, and Cogs and Cogs. Great album.
Yeah, I love that one. My number 4 is Freehand.
Ooh.
Who would believe me now that my hands are free? You know, this is the one that I would assume would be a lot of people's number 1. And with good reason. I think this one and maybe The Power and the Glory are probably the two most accessible Gentle Giant albums, or like the ones that I would pick probably as like, this is the entry point into the band, is this one, and maybe Power and the Glory also. It's got, all the Gentle Giant hallmarks. It's got those amazing vocal lines, killer arrangements, amazing playing, but it's in a more rock sound. There's a little less of the medieval.
Almost.
Yeah, totally. There's like very little medieval instrumentation. There's a medieval like singing all over the place, but the instrumentation is very much rock and roll, which is great. And it works really well for Gentle Giant because they can really rock. They rock the hell out of this material.
Taliban.
Yeah. All right. Taliban's the one standout. I got to say that On Reflection is another one of those tour de force Gentle Giant songs that's on here. It's probably one of the best songs they've ever done, if not the best, especially live. Like they do the gorgeous vocal round, and then they come in together as a band, and then they do a different arrangement of it on instruments only. And it is like the most joyous, rapturous thing ever. Like go watch one of those live Gentle Giant videos from the late 70s.
The BBC,
the BBC Sight and Sound
Missing Piece tour.
Yeah, that's nuts.
That's a great performance.
Yeah, unbelievable stuff. And also, I think that one and the best deep cut, maybe in the whole Gentle Giant catalog, is His Last Voyage. That is a breathtaking song. And just the same as like it became a concert staple. That snapping. The whole thing is great.
Yeah, that's almost jazz.
Yeah, it is. It's great. They meant the jazz.
All right, so we're on to number 3. My number 3 is Interview. And let me say that my top 4 are like, this is Nat's eyelash.
Yeah, mine too,
closeness.
Honestly.
It's like a different day of the week. These could be different. But I really love this album. And to be honest with you, I didn't love it until the Wilson mix came out. Because Gentle Giant were one of those bands that I was into like when I was in high school. And then when I got a little bit older and started my business, I got away from listening to prog so much. So I didn't listen to that one that much, even though I had it at one point. But when I sat down and listened to that, like on an Atmos system, it's like, oh, I'm going to demonstrate my Atmos system. I was like, wow, this is stunning material. And it's slightly less accessible than Freehand. It doesn't go down as smoothly to me as Freehand. But it's definitely more accessible than, say, In a Glass House. Like I feel like there's more to kind of groove to and hang your ear on. And it's kind of an interesting concept. You can kind of tell though that Gentle Giant were getting burned out at this point, or starting to. Even though this is peak material, I think that they were starting to get a little burned out. Like, oh, here we go, another dumb interview question. And they made a whole album about it. Like people asking them what their name of the band means, and all this just inane crap. But it's also about like being a touring band, like songs like Another Show, capturing that mania of tear down, set up, play, lather, rinse, repeat. Got to be in Baltimore by tomorrow. The grind of touring. But you have ludicrous white boy reggae that shouldn't work, but it does. Give It Back is so infectious, and I could listen to it again and
it's
again.
Social commentary too.
It is. Oh yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Very much so social commentary. Empty City is one of those just classic, gorgeous Gentle Giant half ballad.
I love that song. Yeah.
Timing will just get stuck in your head like crazy, but I Lost My Head is the undisputed masterpiece of this album. There's just nothing even close to it on this album. So yeah, I love this album now. I didn't used to, but I love it now. What's your number 3?
Well, my number 3 is also Interview.
Oh, look
at that. Can you believe it? So differently, the year that we saw Three Friends at Nearfest, I actually bought the 35th anniversary of this album. And my dad and I spun it in the car on the way home. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I still had like Three Friends fresh in my head. They played Empty City also. So I recognized that song. I was like, oh shit. I remember hearing it live and be like, wow, what's this song? This is beautiful. And then it was on this album. I liked it immediately. I thought it was terrific. The writing on this album is amazing. It's kind of like Freehand, and it's like you said, it's even a little more so like tighter. It's there's the vocals are still there, but it's all rock instruments, and it's even tighter rock. And I think a large heft of this album is because of John Weathers. John Weathers sounds absolutely amazing on this album. He plays his ass off on this thing. Like, how do you keep up all the crazy time signatures and keep a manic energy in another show? That's a real testament to an excellent, excellent drummer. The material on this album is still incredibly complex, Gentle Giant. It's just a little different because it's, tighter sound. There's slightly less instruments. But my God, does it rock. And my goodness, is it good. I love this record. It kicks major butt. I think also this is probably the best album to showcase how tight Gentle Giant are as a band. Like, these guys are so in sync with each other. They just rip through this material, and it's very evident on this album. It's great. I Lost My Head is, like Ian said, a complete masterpiece. So is Empty City. I really like Design also. It's one of those like weird ones like Knots from Octopus, but it's like to the nth degree. Like it has all sorts of weird percussion. A lot of the vocal harmonies are really dissonant. There's a lot of like boing, springy sounds on an off time in places. It's really cool. It's a really impressive composition. The design of that thing, forget about it. But yeah, I love this record, and I think that every time I hear this record, it only gets better for me.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, I think we have kind of a hot take that this is so high on ours, but I think it's well deserved. This album rules. Those who are not up to snuff on their Gentle Giant should give this a much closer listen, especially the Steven Wilson remix, because it takes what was once a cold and kind of sterile mix and breathes tons of life into it. The album sounds amazing now. My
number 2 is Freehand. Hey. And hey, we're like doing this like one off thing.
We really are.
we should have just agreed on one list, but the only reason why I rated it higher, I think, is due to familiarity, because I actually did like that one 10 or so years ago when I first got into the band. And also I just think that it just goes down a little easier than Interview. Interview is, to me, more of like it's almost like Interview is a combination of In a Glass House and Power and the Glory. It's kind of like really brittle sounding and technical, but it's also got that warmth and it's got that songwriting, and maybe a little bit of the songwriting on Freehand comes through on Interview, but I just find Freehand is like, in a perfect world, I think every rock fan would have a copy of this album in their collection. This would be, as the one meme goes, this would be the one that got popular if I could choose. Because like you said, it is almost got like an AOR radio influence to it.
Yeah.
But they retain their identity throughout. And that's what's important. Just real quick, I'll say my favorite songs on this are On Reflection, top-notch track. You talked about that really, really well. Freehand, the title track, is phenomenal. All the little different. It's a journey. It's a journey through all these little different vignettes. And I love His Last Voyage. I mean, we're saying a lot of the same things, but I have my own interpretation of that song. I heard it on the day that my grandfather passed away, and he was a Navy man. And so that song, that's his song to me now. I just associate that song to him, no matter what. I'm sure the intent was something, much more romantic or whatever, but it feels like, His Last Voyage, like that really hits me. I also do like the last two tracks. The ones you said you don't care much for or don't like less. Taliban is a return to, it's like a return to the raconteur troubadour thing.
Yeah, totally.
And I just think it's pretty. I like that kind of stuff. Mobile's fun. I enjoyed it last night when I listened to it, but I think it does have the problem of just not being that memorable. Like I can't sing you a single melody line from that song, and I could probably sing you something from just about everything else. But that one, it just doesn't have the memory. No. It doesn't get locked in my memory like some of the other stuff. So I think we're up to number 2.
Number 2. So this is the album. Yeah, this is one of the ones that stayed in the same position when we started reviewing, like re-reviewing these albums, and that is A Power and the Glory. This is kind of always number 2 for me. I love this thing. This is the first one I would give a 10 out of 10 to, and that's, saying 2 albums that are a 10 out of 10 is pretty incredible on its own. But this is the other one. Wherever I said before, there are 2 that I think are good entry points. This is the other one. This kind of does the same thing that Freehand does, and then it's got that accessible rock sound, but it's slightly earlier. It's one album earlier, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think maybe it's a little less accessible than Freehand, but it's still like a really cohesive album. I think this is probably the album that flows the best in the catalog. It just, it slaps the whole way. It's so much fun too. Like they've been having a blast playing this material. I could laud on and on about how much I love this thing. I've always loved this album, but for the sake of brevity, I wanted to highlight 2 things, and that's one, So Sincere. That song is unbelievable. Like every time I hear that song, I'm just like it's just like school days. Like I said before, you just get knocked flat because it is so difficult and it's like so badass and fun and real. So like it starts out with this really jaunty and janky kind of song, and then all of a sudden there's this ripping Gary Green guitar solo, and it's like one of the highlights of that solo is one of the highlights of the entire discography. Mm-hmm. And like also the live performances bring out the drum part, and I love John Weathers has this crazy foot pedal work on this tune. It's nuts. It's crazy. So like that's amazing, and how fun, like you said, playing the game is with that instrument they made. It's so much fun. Cogs and Cogs has that fun also, and Proclamation became like a live staple for this band also.
Cogs and Cogs was a concert opener. Can you imagine opening with that?
Yeah, how do you open with something that challenging?
Man,
it's incredible. But my highlights are So Sincere, Aspirations, and Playing the Game. I think those are my highlights from this amazing, incredible record. And yes, I do really like the single song, Power and the Glory.
I do too. I didn't mention it.
Yeah, I think it's fun as heck. I like it. I have this, the 35th anniversary edition. I'm glad it's on there because it's a hoot. Yeah, it's like a simple song, but that's what it's for. It's a great little coda to the album.
I think that the record label said, we need a hit, we need a single, get in there, and they just went in and said, oh God, whatever. She just get off.
Wrote it in the sound check, and then all right, let's go.
Yeah, and they just knocked it out. All right, so this brings us to our number 1 spot, which for those of you who are following along and are familiar with this band, you've probably guessed it already, and that is Octopus.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I'm guessing we're going to kind of just discuss this one because this is, spoiler alert, it's also Mike's favorite.
It's my number 1 also, and I have this one.
And that's cool that you've got
There's the 2 different artworks for this album too. This
copy is autographed by everybody.
That's amazing.
Including Roger Dean.
God, that is so amazing.
Yep, on the corner there. Yeah, that's everybody. I just thought I'd show that.
Holy cow. Even Phil. That's amazing.
Even Phil and Ray, both. It was like $20 on their website 10 years ago.
Wow.
Like right before we went to Nearfest.
Boy, I wish I got that.
And I bought it off their website and took it to Nearfest. I met Roger Dean, the designer, the painter, and he signed it there. And his comment was, "How did you get them all to sign it? They hate each other." I think he was just pulling my leg because I don't see any signs of animosity from this band toward each other whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I think he was just pulling my leg, or maybe he got confused with Yes.
He might have.
Okay, so why do we love Octopus? You first.
So Octopus was my very first Gentle Giant album, so it's a sentimental favorite of mine for sure.
Yeah.
It's got, I think my favorite thing about this album is just it's got this sound, right? There's no other album that sounds like this one in their catalog. Three Friends, I think, kind of comes close, but like you said before, John Weathers comes in the band, and it has this like special production. It's really warm and cozy and inviting, and just, it leads to an album that is a total joy to listen to. Like I put this on somewhat recently, but I put it on again 2 nights ago, and I just had a smile on my face for 35 minutes. Like I was just like, in reverie in my apartment. Like this is wonderful music. And it's really is like one of those things. It's just about the joy of music, and that's Octopus. What a weird sentence that is, but it's every song slaps too. I gotta give it an extra special shout out to Think of Me with Kindness.
Oh yeah,
it's gotta be, in my opinion, Carey's best vocal performance. He sounds amazing on this song, and it is such a beautiful ballad. And plus, it's got trombone. And high school, Michael, I play trombone, and so hearing the trombone on there, I was like, oh, I'm sold. Yeah, it's like, it also has The Boys in the Band, which I think is one of the best, if not the best, progressive rock instrumental song. That's what a progressive instrumental should be, and everything that it aspires to be is to be The Boys in the Band.
Well, that's a great segue for me, because the way I discovered this band was I want to say like a sophomore, like 10th grade, something like that. And I was like really into Dream Theater and maybe Zappa. Like I might have started to dip my toes into Zappa, but I was into more like Symphony X, like more like mainstream prog metal stuff.
I really like Symphony X also.
And I was listening to Pandora Radio, and Pandora Radio, I don't think it exists any longer, but it was like one of the first. Does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was one of the first online radio stations where you could type your preferences in, and it created a radio station for you. That's the algorithm. Like that's the birth of the algorithm. So I was just listening to it, and one night I heard Boys in the Band come on, and that coin flip and stuff, and I heard that the opening just chaos statement of that song, and I thought, because it was a 2008 master, it was that was when the album was released, I thought it was a new album. Like I thought it was a new release. It did not sound 40 years old to me. And whenever I hear that song, really a lot of Gentle Giant does not sound dated to this day to me. Like it still sounds really fresh.
It's pretty timeless, honestly.
Right. It's timeless. And I think that's because they pull on a lot of like medieval stuff and R&B music. Like that stuff's always going to be kind of around. This is like, to me, the exact point where Gentle Giant balance atmosphere and being great musicians, playing great music, writing great music. Like this is, to me, what sets the tone for everything that comes after. And there might be better albums objectively, like Freehand. I mean, I think if I were talking objectively, that might be number one, and Three Friends number two. But just talking about what I'm passionate about, what I love, nothing tops Octopus. It's always going to make me happy.
Yeah, beautifully said. You're exactly right. I agree 100%. This always puts a smile on my face. It's the perfect balance. This is balanced Giant.
So that was our top 11.
Yeah.
Top 10, our top 11, rated from our least favorite to our favorite. The least favorite and the favorite were really easy to decide on. Everything else was hard.
Yes. Well, thanks for watching. It's apparent we both love Gentle Giant, and we hope that you guys too, as you all do as well. And if you have not checked out the band, definitely I would give 3 albums as a potential first spin. It would be either Octopus, Power and the Glory, or Freehand are good starting places. And then, use what your preference, go with your gut for there, because you really could almost do no wrong.
I agree.
Don't avoid Giant for a Day. You'll forget that one and go with the rest of them.
So actually what we're going to do is in the description, Mike is going to make a Spotify playlist.
Yes.
And
I'm down below.
Yeah, that's going to be down below. We're going to include a lot of these songs that we're talking about. So if you just want to click on that and listen through, and who knows, maybe you like Gentle Giant, but some of these you've never heard. So there might be something new to you. And if you folks at home who have been watching this, if you enjoyed this, please let us know in the comments, what's your ranking of the Gentle Giant?
Yeah, how would you rank their studio albums?
Yeah, that's what we would like to hear. Give us some feedback. Start a discussion. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we're going to be talking, Mike and I are going to be joined by Jocko, and we're going to be talking about the Bursting Out album by Jethro Tull this weekend. And Mike and I are also planning to do a ranking of King Crimson albums next.
Yes.
So if that sounds like something you would be interested in, please do subscribe to the channel so you can hear more from us. I'm also including a link to my Amazon wish list. If you should like to make a donation to the channel, anything that you donate to the channel has a chance of being talked about. So that's the best way to get me to talk about something. Unless it's in my collection, of course. You can also request something. If it's in my collection, I'll try to make an effort. So until then, my name's Ian Beabout, and this has been my friend Mike.
Bye-bye now.
And we'll see you and hear from you real soon. Or actually, you'll see and hear from us real soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
You'll see and hear from us.